All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for so much for coming. So today, we are going to do two things. First, I'm going to finish this chapter, and then in the second half, I'm going to go through the sample test for our midterm two. Just remind you, so we are going to have our second midterm next Wednesday. Okay, so the format is going to be the same as the last one. So basically, you need to log into Zoom, and then I give you the access code, and then so you have the whole class to finish your exam, right? So for the sample test, it should be available online, so in Canvas. So if you cannot find, let me know so I can send you a copy during the break, because usually we have 5 minutes break for each class, right? So now let's see, so what we have done so far. So this is a chapter, so we are trying to understand labor market, right? So we're trying to understand how we are going to measure in labor market. So that's the main thing in this chapter. We have looked at unemployment, right? So we have looked at unemployment rate, and we understood unemployment rate is a good but not perfect indicator. We look at other things to complement what unemployment rate did not fully capture the health of the labor market. And in last class, we differentiate between three types of unemployment. So this includes frictional, structural, and cyclical. Okay? What's frictional? Frictional essentially is because the scarcity of information in our economy, so that take people time to sort into the right job, right? So this taking time to sort into the job is going to create some unemployment, and we label those unemployment as frictional unemployment. Just imagine if you move to a new location, like an example we talked about earlier. So you move to, say, for example, California, right? And then so it's going to take you a few weeks to find out so where I want to work, and in which region I want to live, so on and so forth. It's going to take some time to find out job, so you becomes temporarily unemployed, and that's called frictional unemployment. And what's structural unemployment? Structural unemployment is because there's some structural problem in the economy. So we have looked at a few examples. Number one, union. Right? So there are workers' union. So they are trying to protect workers, negotiating better benefit or terms. Right? But so as a consequence, that can artificially raise the wage above the equilibrium wage. So that's going to create unemployment. So that's called structure. The other example of structural unemployment, it could be efficiency wage, right? What is the efficiency wage? Essentially, it's a wage the employer or the business provide, so that gives the employees incentive to work hard. Okay, so that's called efficiency wage, right? Okay, so those are structural unemployment. So we label frictional and structural unemployment together, called natural unemployment. The main reason we call them natural unemployment is because those things are natural to the structure of the economy, to the fundamental of the economy. Okay, so you really cannot get rid of them because there's like fundamental issue in the market economy. So we call it natural unemployment. So, but the natural unemployment may be different from the actual unemployment. So their difference is going to be called cyclical unemployment. So this cyclical unemployment essentially is going to correlate it with economic growth. And then particularly when we are in a recession, meaning that the economic growth slow down, the cyclical unemployment will pick up. It pick up for two reasons. Number one, so when economic growth slow down, the business demands less worker or they lay off worker. So that's going to increase unemployment. Number two, so during recession or when economic growth slowing down, the entire economy is not functioning in full capacity. And then so the economy's ability to generate new jobs will be undermined. So in that sense, that's going to create additional unemployment. So that's why cyclical unemployment is correlated with the economy. Okay, so in particular, when recession hits, we have higher cyclical unemployment. So that's the main thing we have discussed last class. Now we are going to look at the last part in this lecture. We are going to look at the price. Okay? So we're going to look at inflation and deflation. Okay? So first, inflation is going to hurt the economy. Now we need to explain so why inflation hurts the economy, right? So inflation hurts the economy in the sense, particularly in the labor market, in the sense that is going to affect the actual take-home wage you have. So basically, if there's inflation, if your wage is fixed, and then so the purchasing power your wage provide to you will decrease. So in that sense, so when we look at labor market, so we factor in the inflation and we look at real wage. And remember, so earlier as we talked about, so we also look at wage so that to understand the health of the labor market, right? Or the quality of jobs, right? Okay, so because of the existence of inflation or deflation, the better measure of wage is real wage. What is real wage? Real wage is the wage rate divided by the price level. But what's price level? So in previous previous chapter, we talked about price level, right? So we talk about CPI, we talk about PPI, right? So those are price indexes, but these price indexes just give you the price level, right? So real income, what's real income? It's income divided by price level. Okay, so we just denominate it by the price. To factor in the price may affect your purchasing power, right? So now, so here's what we have inflation. Okay, so this inflation just gives us a measure how price change. Okay, so price level essentially is the price index we talked about in the previous class. Inflation rate is the percentage change in price level. Right, that's given by the formula here. Okay. Example, if CPI increased from 120 to 135 over a year, what is inflation rate? So now we can apply the formula above, right? So just look at the change in inflation, and then divided by the base year, right? And then so what times 100, that's just going to normalize. So this 12.5%, that is the percentage change in price level. And this percentage change in price level gives us inflation rate. Right, so here we can look at actual data for the US economy from 1960 to 2014. So this green line, so this line is price level. You can see is keep moving up. And now, so this purple line is the inflation rate, which is measuring how this price level change compared to previous year. Right? So you can see the inflation fluctuate. This is number one. Number two, the inflation's pretty much always positive, means we always has inflation, except we only have deflation in 2009, right? And then after we finish this module, once we enter the last module of this class, so you will start to understand so why we have deflation in a recession. Actually, 2009 is the worst recession we had since Great Depression. Right. Other things you may want to keep in mind is, so after 1980, 1980 is kind of watershed period for US economy. So before 1980, you can see, so the price level or the inflation was very high. After 1980, it becomes relatively stable, less volatile. Right. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind, and we will pick up that since later. Okay. Now let's see what are the costs associated with inflation. Okay. So the first cost of inflation we call shoe leather cost. So this is just a symbol. Right? So this is a symbolic name. So shoe leather, like this background picture shows, right? So it basically says if there's high inflation, you have to move it around to get cash, to use your cash to buy groceries or buy stuff, to avoid your cash lose value. Okay? And so this moving around is going to cost you shoe leathers, but this actually represent the transaction cost, the time, the energy you must spend to do those unnecessary transactions, right? Okay, so basically it's summarized by this sentence. Since cash lost its value quickly during high inflation, people waste more time running around to spend it as fast as they can. Okay, so the first things you want to do when you get a paycheck, you probably just withdraw money from the bank and then go to grocery store to hoard the stuff. Otherwise, the money you just received as your paycheck will buy less goods. Okay, so this is called shoe leather cost. That's one cause of high inflation. Here is the example. Back in 1985, Israel experienced high inflation of 500%. And as a outcome, so people spend a lot of time in front of the line to withdraw the cash. Just keep in mind, this is 1985. In modern days, so you probably don't need to go to bank. So you just spend with your credit card, use a debit card, and you go online shopping. But this is in 1985. Right? So you can see, so that is the cause of high inflation. The second cause. So if there's high inflation, just imagine if you are a small business owner, you own a local restaurant. Okay? So what are you going to do? So if you keep the price of your dishes, okay, and then you're going to lose profit, right? Because everything becomes more expensive, including wage, including ingredient, including gas, utility, rent, everything. But if you keep the price of your dishes you're selling, and then you're going to lose profit. And then naturally, so you may want to do some adjustment. And then, so in order to do adjustment, so what do you need to do? So you need to change your menu, like here, right? So you need to change your menu. But when you change your menu, and then there are two costs. One cost is obvious, which is if you change your menu, you need to reprint your menu, right? So this is going to take time, take money to reprint those menus. This is number one. There's indirect costs. So if you print a new menu, okay, so beginning of seller, the price increase from $6 to $8. And then so you may scare away some of your loyal customer. Okay, so that's other costs. So you may face when you have to change your menu as a response to high inflation. Right? So this is the second cost. Now the third cost is called unit of account cost. So later, so we have a chapter to discuss what is considered as money and what are the function of money. One important function of money is that it's a unit of account. It's like a yardstick for us to measure the value of the goods and service we trade in the market. Now just imagine if one country has high inflation, or like in this background, so this is the Bank of Zimbabwe. So they experience extremely hyperinflation. Look at this bill. The face value is $100 trillion, but its actual value is around $30 US dollar. Okay. Now, if that's the case, I mean, in this country they have hyperinflation, and then so people may abandon their money, so they start to use some other currencies, like United States, US dollar, right? And then the government lose the ability of use their own currency to use as a unit of account, right? So, and at the same time, so the government lose their revenue by printing out money because the households, the business decide to abandon to use their own currency. Right? So that's the third cause of high inflation. Okay. Now, so we understand what is inflation, how to measure inflation. And I just explained to you 3 causes associated with high inflation. Now let's see, so in terms of macroeconomy, how would high inflation or low inflation affect different people? And so how we are going to measure that difference? Okay, so the key things is, so the inflation is going to matter to interest rate. But what is interest rate? Interest rate is the price a lender charges for the use of his or her saving for 1 year. Just imagine if I borrow $1 from one student, and then so typically, so I promise to give you back more than $1 as a appreciation, right? Or as a gratitude. But in the market, so this extra money I paid as a return for borrowing money from the lender is called interest rate, right? Because this borrowed money helped me to do the necessary transaction or to do the business or to smooth my consumption. So I must pay for the money I borrow. But then, so what I paid for the money I borrow is called interest rate. But now, just imagine if there's inflation. Okay, so we can just put a numeric example. So if I borrow $1 and I promise tomorrow, so I'm going to pay you $1.1. And then from here, you can see the interest rate. Actually, this is nominal interest rate. The interest rate is going to be 10%. Right? Because I pay 10 cents for borrowing $1 from you. So this is a nominal interest rate. But I just imagine if at the same time there's a 10% of inflation. Now let's see what that means to the lender. And furthermore, let's just assume, so $1, you can buy 1 bottle of water. Okay, $1, 1 bottle. Now, inflation is 10%, meaning so tomorrow, so this 1 bottle of water is going to cost you $1.1. Meaning so tomorrow, so I return $1.10 to you as a lender. So you're going to get 1 bottle of water. Exactly. And so in that sense, as a lender, so I lend out, or you lend out 1 bottle of water to me, and tomorrow I repay with you with 1 bottle of water. So in that sense, you earn a 0 interest rate because 1 bottle of water equal to 1 bottle of water. There's no additional water, right? Then so here's the real interest rate is 0%. And actually, so the way we calculate real interest rate is just use nominal interest rate here, 10%, minus rate of inflation, which is 10%. Right? And why we need to subtract this inflation is because the inflation is going to reduce the pay or the reduced amount of pay, the value of the amount of pay in the borrower. Right? But certainly, so the inflation is going to have different impact depending on who you are. Are you a lender or borrower? In this case, inflation is going to benefit the borrower because the borrower basically pays 0 interest, real interest. But this is not good for the lender because the lender earns 0 interest. Right? So we will have an example to understand how these inflation affect interest rate and how inflation affect different party in the economy. Now let's look at this example. Okay, Mary expects the inflation to be 5%, and she's willing to pay a real interest rate of 3%. Joe expects inflation 5, and he's willing to lend at 3. If the actual inflation is 6 and the loan contract specify a nominal interest rate of 8. Okay. So now let's write down the key information. Okay. So in the market, the nominal interest rate, let's call R, equal to 8%. Inflation, let's call I, equal to 6%. This implies the real interest rate equal to 8 minus 6 equal to 2%. That's real interest rate. Okay. Now let's look at Mary. She is willing to pay a real interest rate of 3%. Now the actual real interest rate is 2%. That means it's cheaper to borrow for her. Right? On the other hand, Joe, so he's expecting to receive 3%. Now the actual real interest rate is 2%. So he doesn't want to lend out. Right? So the answer is C. Okay. Now we go to another practice questions. Okay, so regularly, in the regular times we should have an in-class discussion, but now so we don't have this this luxury. So let me just give you 1 minute to read this question, and then so I explain to you how we solve this problem. Okay. Okay, so the key things here is the rate of inflation is 8% currently. Now, so the question asks you how this 8% of inflation affect one by one. Sarah, Bob, Milt. Start with Sarah. Sarah works for a firm that automatically adjusts her wage to the annual rate of inflation. That just means if there's an inflation of 8%, her salary is going to increase by 8%. On the other hand, if there's inflation of negative 8%, and then her wage will reduce by 8%. So that just means she's going to be fully insured against this inflation. Her purchasing power will stay the same. She's completely risk-free. Now, Bob works for a firm that grants its employee a 5% annual income increase. So that is designed to overcome the inflation that may reduce the workers' actual wage. So unfortunately, so the rate of inflation is 8%. So that just means Bob's income increase cannot match with the price increase. So in that sense, Bob is going to suffer. Let's use a negative sign. Milt. Milt is a retired and received 2 payments, a pension that fixed at $2,000 and a social security payment of $1,000. The social security payment is indexed to the inflation. Okay, what this means? Means if there's inflation, and then so the pension will keep constant, nothing change, and it says he's still receiving $2,000 per month. But the social security payments he received from the government will adjust, meaning so now he's going to receive $1,080, given this 8% inflation. And then so clearly, so Milt is going to suffer because a big fraction, actually 2/3 of his income will stay constant, regardless whether there's inflation or deflation. Right? So he's going to suffer as well. And the answer is in this slide. So if you have any questions, so just read through these slides. And if you have further questions, so feel free to email me. All right. And again, so clearly there are winners and losers from inflation. In early 1970s, in the US, there was high inflation. And then so whoever took out mortgage, they are going to realize this high inflation is going to benefit them in the sense the money they own to the bank lose value, or they own less and less. But certainly, so they are going to face challenging in other aspects of their economic life. Think about so the other things they pay, right? All right. So what is deflation? Deflation is opposite to inflation, right? So inflation has its problem, as we see earlier, right? So there are three causes associated with inflation, and so that's why so the government has trying to use different policy to reduce inflation or bring the inflation down. And this process of bringing the inflation down is called disinflation. Okay. But unfortunately, so there's a cost if we trying to bring the inflation down. And this cost typically happens in the short term. And if we look at the data, so you can see the cost. Okay, let's first look at 1970s or 1970s. Start from August 1974. So the inflation rate was pretty high, it's 10%. And so this is this line. So if you trace out this line just trace out what happened in each month at any time period, what was the inflation rate and what was unemployment rate. So you can see in order to bring down so eventually, so the inflation rate declined from 10% to 6%. But you can see in order to bring this inflation down, so we pay the cost, the US economy pay a cost in the sense it has to suffer a high unemployment. Look at here, so the unemployment rate was 5.5% around. Now at some point it reached to 9%. And similarly in 1980, okay, so the inflation at the beginning of 1980, so the inflation rate was 12%. Eventually it brought down to 4%. But then so if you trace out this line, you can see at the worst day, so we pay a cost of 11% of unemployment rate, so that eventually we brought down the inflation. Okay, so this is what the data told us, what history told us. And then in the future chapter, I will explain to you, so why this deflation, why this disinflation will cause temporary unemployment, or why there's an interesting interaction between unemployment rate and inflation. From here, clearly you can see lower inflation, higher unemployment, or vice versa, right? So we will discuss that in future chapters. Okay, now let's look at these practice questions. So you have just been awarded a cost of living increase tied to CPI. The CPI has gone from 110 to 112. If your salary is 30,000 per year before the increase, what will it be after CPI increase is factoring? So what this means, it just means, so you start with 30K, and then so you're going to end up with some numbers. So these some numbers is going to make sure your actual purchasing power does not change. Well, in other words, so just make sure 30K divided by 110 equal to this number divided by 112. And then so immediately this just means the new salary will be 30K times 112 divided by 110. You just keep on with the inflation, right? So you can do this calculation yourself. So the answer is B, right? Okay, so that is all for the new material. So we're supposed to discuss. And so everything we have discussed between the first exam and the second exam and today, so will be covered in our exam on coming Wednesday, right? So basically we have discussed 3 chapters. In the first one, we talk about GDP, how to measure GDP, and how to measure price change. In the second chapter, we talk about economic growth. In the third chapter, which is this one, the current one, we look at how to measuring labor market. We talk about unemployment. We talk about labor market participation, and we look at different type of unemployment. And in the end of this part, we look at inflation and the inflation, the impact of inflation on wage on the economy, right? So that's we have discussed. So let's take 5-minute break, and after the break, so we will look at the sample test, and so that's going to be help you for your exam on Wednesday, right?